parents not believing their children. I always hated that trope so much. You know, like in horror movies. If your child wakes up night after night screaming bloody murder, scared out of its mind, normal parents won't just dismiss it out of hand just because they couldn't find the cause in a single evening. I know that because I had to live through it. And even though I didn't understand what my parents were going through with me back then, I feel like I do now. This is kind of, I don't know, maybe an apology to them. If I could, I would tell them in person, but I don't think that's possible anymore. It all started right around the time I turned 7. Mom, Dad, and I lived in a small house in the suburbs of a mid-sized city back then. I know my father was an engineer, or something like that, and he really loved the neighborhood. Mom worked part-time in an office, and she wasn't quite as impressed with our surroundings. Well, whatever. I remember a few moments from before it all fell apart, and in my memories, they seem happy. There were arguments from time to time, mostly about money, sometimes about the cars, but it was nothing compared to what other families go through. My parents were in love, that much I know. I remember finding them sitting outside on the porch during the fall, both of them laughing almost to the point of tears. Dad calling our landline on Mom's birthday and coming home not even 15 minutes later with this big, dumb smile on his face. Mom having a slight grin on her lips whenever she heard his car driving into the garage. It wasn't perfect by any measure, but I just want to make it clear that the times before it all started were truly blessed. The kind of happiness I would love to find myself, even though I fear it might be too late for that now. Because this world is truly cruel and uncaring. Those moments I remember were the last happy ones for pretty much any of us. It all started going downhill a few weeks after my mom's birthday. I know that because I still remember this dumb piece of decoration Dad had hung on the wall and his refusal to take it down for another month. It was still there. The first night, I found myself walking through the house, scared and all alone. The nightmare I'd had, I remember with absolute clarity. Even now, decades later. In my dream, I was lying in my bed, sleeping soundly, when a single noise suddenly startled me awake. It was the sound of a heavy door falling shut somewhere in the house. I remember opening my eyes in the dream, looking up at the dark ceiling of my room, unsure of whether I had heard the noise at all. But I had. Part of me knew, and there was no room for doubt. I felt confused. Not scared, at least at first. I had lived in this place pretty much since I could remember anything, and I knew it inside out. From the small attic down to the basement, this house was my home, and I thought I was familiar with every single part of this place. But the sound of that door falling shut, I didn't recognize it at all. It was too dark, too loud, too heavy. I don't know how to describe it, to be honest. All the doors inside the house, except for maybe the main entrance, were cheap, made of plywood or something like it, but the noise that had startled me had come from one much heavier. Like something you would find in a castle or a dungeon. I tried going back to sleep in my dream, but pretty much instantly found myself unable to do so. It had called out to me, that sound. Broken the tranquility of the night and made me aware that something was off. So, I did what every curious child would do. I hopped out of bed, still clad in my pajamas, rubbed my eyes and started sneaking through my room. The sound had come from downstairs, I was sure, so I first needed to get out of my room and walk along the hallway past my parents' bedroom door as well. Then I could descend the stairs and look through the first floor. Part of me already knew I wouldn't find it there, that the sound had come up from the lowest point of the house, the old basement. Even in my dream, I felt a chill at the thought. But my curiosity got the better of me at that time. I opened the door to my room as quickly and quietly as I could and stepped out into the hallway. The night outside wasn't nearly as dark as it should have been. I could see every detail, from the small pictures hanging up on the walls to the handle of my parents' bedroom door. What would my life have turned out like if I had stopped there and, instead of walking on, had gone to my parents that first night? Would it all have ended before it even began? I doubt it, but maybe? No. Thoughts like that are pointless, especially now. What's done is done. That is something my dad always used to say, and I absolutely agree. Worrying about what could have been never leads to anything good. We have to play the cards we've been dealt, right? Back in my dream, I moved through the hallway, seeing slight shadows even without any extra light playing on the walls. I don't think I quite realized that I was still dreaming. And I don't think it would have made any difference to me back then if I had. Sneaking down the stairs, I was still listening for a repeat of that noise that had startled me so much back then. But it didn't reappear. Instead, the night was as calm and silent as always. There were no cars driving by outside, no people talking, or the noises coming from TVs reaching my ears. The neighborhood had always been calm and tranquil, but in that dream, it felt even more so. Almost dead. Like a graveyard, I remember thinking back then, as I felt the first chill since leaving my room. Still, it didn't stop me. I don't know if it was because I was just a kid, unable to realize the danger, or if it had something to do with it all happening inside a dream. Whatever the case, I descended the stairs and started walking around the first floor of the house. It wasn't quite as dark there as it had been upstairs, since the windows were bigger and the area more open, but that also meant that the shadows looked that much deeper. I felt it in my dream. A cold chill seeped into my body as I walked from the front door to the kitchen, then from the living room to the stairs leading down to the basement. This was the place that was drawing me in. I knew the second I saw the door in front of the steps standing open. Just a gap. The cold air was coming from down there. Something inside of me urged me to go on. It wasn't the curiosity of a child or the bravado of youth, but something deeper, more primal. I put my hand on the door and suddenly felt it. This vibration running through the whole house. It almost felt like an earthquake, but there was no fear in my mind. Standing there by the door with the cold air and shaking ground, all I could focus on was this intense longing to know what was happening right now. Slowly, I opened the door and was greeted by absolute darkness in front of my eyes. The rumbling stopped, as if it had already accomplished what it had set out to do, and instead, silence filled the air. I, on the other hand, suddenly felt completely torn. Part of me wanted to go on, to find a reason for these strange occurrences, while another warned me not to set a single foot onto the stairs. Whatever was down there was dangerous, it hissed. Something bad had invaded the basement, and it was trying to draw me in. I needed to turn around and run upstairs, hide between my parents until the morning sun could clear away all those shadows. My hand was shaking, and my breath fogged up in front of my face. The part telling me to run and hide was winning. I could feel my feet slowly sliding backwards. That was until something, or someone, called out my name. The sound reached me, filled my ears, and suddenly my body stopped shaking. Before my eyes, the shadows seemed to move back, giving way to the sight of the stairs leading down. Once more, someone called out my name, and I felt my body tensing up. It wasn't a voice I had ever heard before, but somehow it drew me in completely. My left foot touched the first step as my body moved almost on its own. It didn't strike me as strange that someone had called me or that no one else seemed to hear that voice. Neither one of my parents had made a sound above the first or second time. I remember thinking that that voice had only been for me and me alone. Taking another step, the coldness gripped me even worse than before. I was trembling as I slowly descended, staring into a basement that looked so familiar on one hand, yet completely foreign on the other. Even though I hadn't been down there in days, maybe even 1 or 2 weeks, I still knew that place like the back of my hand. Dad's old trophies, the heater, old clothing no one would wear anymore. The rack filled with big jars full of pickled vegetables. But that night, it all looked strangely different. It didn't have that warmth to it usually held for me, as if someone had snuck down there and exchanged each and every object with one looking almost like it. That's how I felt about it back then, but it wasn't enough to stop my feet. To the contrary, something else inside me awoke. A morbid kind of curiosity told me to go on and find out what exactly had gotten into the basement. My feet left the stairs and stepped onto the cold concrete flooring of the lowest part of the house. I felt the rough texture coupled with the coldness seeping into my body from every direction. But even though I was shivering and shaking, I made my way toward the center of the basement. The first noise that had woken me up had come from somewhere around here. I was sure of that. Seconds passed as I stood there and looked around. It all seemed so ordinary, yet felt so strange. That was until my eyes fell upon the back wall. A place where nothing had ever stood or hung, where white paint covered a concrete wall. Now, in the darkness of the night, shadows seemed to fall on it and cover it completely. I felt my heart beating so fast as I saw it, because in those shadows I could see something else. A shape that was slowly taking form. The white paint seemed to dissolve on its own as lines appeared, then shifted, then changed. Where normally the odor of dust and paint hung in the air, now I could smell something new. A stench I had never noticed before. My mouth went dry as the shadows suddenly moved back and disappeared, giving way to a sight I hadn't expected. There, in the wall now, stood a door. An old wooden one with big metal hinges and a handle that looked made out of cast iron. I felt that then for the first time. The fear that would follow me for the rest of my life. It wasn't a normal entrance, no. That much was clear, but what made me tremble wasn't the sight, but the feeling that came with it. The part of me that had warned me before about not coming down here was now screaming in my head. These deafening shouts tried to drown out the panic and make me move, but I couldn't, because right in front of me, the handle of the door started to rattle. I could feel it behind the entrance, this presence that was trying to get in. Finally, all the bravado and curiosity seemed to disappear, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, waking myself and my parents up. The only problem was, I didn't come to in my bed. No. Instead, as my mum reached me, she found me in the basement, lying balled up on the floor, still screaming and crying. Dad reached us just a few seconds later, and they carried me up into the living room where they put me in a blanket and tried to calm me down. It took an hour, I think. Maybe it just felt that long to my child self, but looking back now, I'm not so sure anymore. What I do know and remember is the looks my parents shot each other. Back then, they thought it was simply a nightmare coupled with a sleepwalking episode. I guess deep down I wanted to believe it too, even though I knew that something was off nonetheless. Well, I never sleepwalked before, but it could have just been a one-off, right? So the next night, when it was time to go to bed, both my mum and dad came into my room and made sure I was feeling comfortable. It was a nice gesture, but as soon as they turned off the light and I closed my eyes, I heard that sound again. Only this time, my body seemed to move on its own. I tried to shout for help as soon as my feet touched the carpet next to my bed, but just as my body moved without my say-so, my mouth stayed closed. Every step I took, I felt again how powerless I was. Tears were streaming from my eyes as I walked past my parents' bedroom door, down the stairs, through the first floor, and toward the basement. Had it taken control of me by then, or had I been already following it since that first night? I'm not so sure. Maybe I had, but it let me believe that I still had a choice back then. My naked feet touched the rough floor of the basement, and my fear turned into pure terror. There, at the back wall, I could see it. The door. Its weathered wood, its metal handle and hinges. I knew it the moment I saw it. Whatever was behind it was calling out to me, forcing me to come down from my bedroom. And no matter how hard I struggled, my body just didn't listen. With tears still streaming down my face, I felt myself walking over the rough concrete floor, extending a hand in front of me, ready to grab the handle and let this thing in. It called out my name again, and this time I could clearly hear the voice coming from behind the door. My body was shaking, and I was sweating and crying, but my feet didn't stop. In a blind panic, I tried to force myself awake while I screamed out incessantly in my mind. The moment the door opened, it would come out and devour me. Something heavy landed behind me and the concrete floor of the basement. Footsteps were racing toward me. I could already see the grain of the wood forming this abysmal door. Just 3 more steps. A big arm slung around my midsection pulled me up and into a hug. At my dad's touch, the spell this thing had put on me was broken, and I screamed my lungs out as he held me up and kept me safe. His second hand was softly patting my back as my shouts echoed around the basement, waking up Mom as well, who came down clad in her normal bathrobe. Some of the details burned themselves into my mind. Her worried face, the smell of old paint and dust in the basement, cold sweat all over my dad's skin. I remember sleeping between them that night. Well, at least a few hours we still had after the last incident. Dad's hand never left my shoulder, and I am sure he didn't sleep a single moment himself for the rest of the night. The next day, I remember having conversations, first with my parents, then with the doctor. I told them about the door, about the thing behind calling out to me. Dad was sitting there next to me, and I could see the tension in him. That is one detail I remember so clearly now. His eyes almost burning while his skin felt cold. Did he believe me? I don't know. But I am sure he was scared out of his mind. The rest of the day I spent in the hospital, checking everything about my body, from blood tests to MRIs. They didn't find anything wrong with me, which was a relief, and yet, at the same time, the worst news we could have gotten. Maybe it's the stress. The doctors told my parents and gave them some pills for me to take that evening. That Dad definitely didn't believe, although Mom seemed at least slightly reassured. My parents gave me the medication and then took me to sleep between them again. I remember staring up at the ceiling as the pills started to work. This drowsiness overcame me, while part of me fought tooth and nail to stay awake. Both Mum and Dad's hands were on my shoulders, keeping me safe, I told myself. But even back then, I knew that it wouldn't be enough. The second my eyes fell shut and darkness overtook me, I felt it already. This presence so close to me, waiting for the right moment to pull me in again. There was no escaping it. I felt my body trembling through the night, but when I finally opened my eyes, it was calm again. Without making a sound, I scooted down the mattress. My parents' hands left my shoulders. In my head, I was screaming already, begging them to wake up. They didn't. Both of them were snoring softly, unaware I was getting dragged away again. I felt resignation setting in. How could I fight this if even my parents couldn't stop me? My body moved on its own, nimbly, and slipped out of bed without making a sound. And all the while, I couldn't even turn my head around to look back at my parents. The quiet sounds of my own footsteps filled my ears as I made my way through the room and toward the door. Please wake up. Please stop me. I was begging in my mind, yet no sound was coming out of my mouth. My hand touched the handle of the door and I felt a sudden chill. Would it be like that once I reached the basement? Would I open that entrance as well? What then? Would something come out or would I get dragged in? The door of my parents' bedroom opened silently, and I slipped out of the room while in my mind I still tried to figure out what was about to happen. Somehow, I felt like maybe I could save myself if I knew what was coming. A very childish idea, I now know. My feet carried me down the hallway, then the stairs. I walked silently again through the house, then found myself in front of the basement door. This time it was closed, locked. Hope bloomed in my mind as I saw the doors standing shut today. It must have been Dad's doing, I thought. Maybe he had felt it as well, the bad presence down there. My hand reached out anyway, as I still clung to the hope that a simple lock in a door would stop whatever was happening to me. Another childish hope. As soon as my fingers touched the handle, I heard it. The lock sprang open with a loud click. It seemed to echo through the house, and immediately I heard it. A noise coming from my parents' bedroom. 2 pairs of feet hit the floor above just as the door to the basement swung open in front of me. They'd heard it. Mum and Dad were coming to save me. I looked down into the darkness of the basement as, on the floor above me, a door was yanked open. Someone called out my name from below. My feet began moving again. I took a step and heard people jumping down the stairs above. Another step. The door behind me fell shut with a bang. I heard it, the lock clicking again, just as racing footsteps drew closer. My body didn't stop moving, didn't even speed up, as if everything was still going according to plan. Someone reached the door to the basement just as my feet touched the cold concrete floor. I heard voices coming from above. My parents were shouting as one of them rattled the handle. The door was locked again, but they knew I was in there. I just hoped and prayed that they would get through it somehow, since in front of me, shadows gave way again and the old wooden door appeared. The sight made cold sweat break out all over my body. I could hear my dad throwing himself against the locked entrance to the basement while my mum screamed. My arm stretched out toward the handle, as I continued walking over the cold concrete floor. Another bang echoed around me. Dad was trying to get in and save me. The door was coming closer and closer. He wouldn't make it through in time. I screamed in my mind and tried to stop my feet. It was pointless. My body didn't listen to me. I couldn't do anything to stop it. The door was so close now. I could smell the wood and the stench of what was behind it. Someone called my name. Mom. But at the same time, the thing behind the door. Dad screamed as the loudest crash yet filled the basement. The door above broke and I heard him falling down the stairs. Save me. Those two words repeated in my mind. My hand stretched out, my fingertips brushed against cold iron. The smell of blood reached my nose just before someone took me off my feet, held me tight and rolled over the floor with me. It was Dad. Warm blood trickled from his head and fell on my shoulder as he held me so close. I was screaming and crying, and Mom pulled me out of his grasp. Through all the noise, I could hear it. My dad's voice.
I saw it,
he said, again and again as my mom hugged me so tightly I was afraid she would never let go. We stayed up, all three of us, through the night. Dad looked the worst. He had a black eye and scrapes and bruises all over, but he was smiling any time I looked over at him and he noticed me. Everything will be okay. That's what they told me. But every time they didn't notice me looking, they shot each other glances. There was fear in their eyes, incomprehension. I tried to ignore it because even though I was a child, I could feel their fear through those looks. Well, the next morning, Mom drove Dad to the hospital, and I stayed at her side the whole day. Tired and exhausted, I could hardly keep up with what they were talking about. Big words were thrown around. Concussion, contusions, the like. What I clearly remember is my parents arguing after dinner as I fell asleep on the couch next to them. They were talking about what was going on and what they needed to do. In the end, they both decided that we could use a break from the house, so they packed me into the car, got some luggage together, and we drove to a hotel in the city. I was too tired to really do anything besides sleep and doze all evening. Maybe I should have struggled to stay awake more. I don't know. It probably wouldn't have mattered at all. We slept in a big bed in the hotel, but as soon as I closed my eyes there, I felt it again. The presence. It was inside me, part of me, something I would never be able to shake off. Someone called my name, and as I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hotel, but standing in the driveway of our home. The shock I felt was far worse than anything I had ever experienced before. But my mouth didn't open, my legs didn't stop moving. I was walking up toward the entrance of the house, put out my hand, and the door opened just like before. A new wave of dread filled me as I saw the darkness inside our home greet me. This time was different, it seemed to say. This time, there was no one around to stop it. I struggled internally, tried to resist, but my body moved on its own. With every step I took, I felt it more clearly. This was it. This was the day I would die. My heart was racing. I was sweating and crying, but my legs carried me forward toward a place that would become my grave. The house itself was dark, empty and cold, but I didn't care. I couldn't. All my focus was on slowing my steps, waking myself up, forcing my body to turn around. My footfalls echoed back from the walls as I slowly made my way through the living room and headed toward the basement stairs. My name was called again from below. I could feel it so clearly in the air. This cold chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Whatever was down there was ready to be let out. With tears still streaming down my face, I reached a broken basement door and watched helplessly as I shoved it aside without another glance. The steps leading down felt colder than ever before, but I walked on, unable to stop or even slow myself. It was coming. My end. The tears that had been running down my cheeks stopped as I reached the middle of the stairs. I could feel my pulse racing, but the fears seemed to disappear. There was nothing I could do, I told myself. Mom, Dad, I am so sorry. My breath fogged up in the cold air in front of me. This was it, I told myself again. I reached the concrete floor and walked across it as the shadows once more formed and gave way to the door. It was waiting in there. I wanted to cry and scream, but nothing came out of my mouth. My hand extended in front of me. The handle was right there. I touched it, and my fingers closed around it for the first time. Hot and cold pain seemed to seep into my arm through the iron. I felt sick and exhausted, terrified out of my mind. The handle started to move and rattle while I was still holding onto it. In my mind, I was begging for anyone to come and save me. Far away, a car was speeding toward the house. It was too late, I knew. My mind went blank as I heard the clicking of the lock. I felt sick to my stomach. Inside my chest, my heart was racing out of control. At such a young age, I felt death approaching. My hand moved, pressed down the handle of the door, and it opened. The stench wafting out of that place took my breath away. Voices screamed as the door got pushed open fully, and I stared into what looked like a hallway. Only the walls, ceiling, or floor weren't made of anything I could recognize. They pulsed like the insides of a living being. Someone screamed my name from the driveway as shadows slithered out of the door and wrapped around my legs. I felt my body go limp as something dragged me forward into that hallway. The door would fall shut, I knew. Once I was in there, I would never get out again. A scream came out of my mouth as I got dragged over the threshold and felt the hot, sticky floor against my skin. I can't really remember well what happened next. My mind was in so much turmoil. It all seems to blend together. I looked up and watched the door close, then suddenly saw a hand appear, keeping it from falling shut. The shadows were pulling me in, dragging me along as I screamed and cried. Someone pushed the door open again. 2 people jumped in after me. I felt my mom's hand grab me by the shoulder, then Dad helping her. My parents were crying as well, screaming at each other. They were pulling me back as more and more shadows wrapped around them. Somehow, I got free. Mom grabbed me and pushed me toward the door as Dad screamed at me to run. That's my last memory of them. Their shouts. I don't know how I got out, or why those shadows didn't come for me again. All I remember is that dreadful sound of the door falling shut behind me as I stumbled out into the empty basement and collapsed. I was shaking, crying, holding my knees against my chest as I hyperventilated. The door didn't disappear immediately. That much I remember clearly. I looked up at it, waiting for it to open again, but it didn't. And I could hear them, my parents, crying behind the closed door. The next thing I remember is waking up to sunshine streaming into the basement, and me shivering and shaking as I was lying on the floor. Somehow the door had finally disappeared, probably when the sun had come up. I didn't even manage to stand up on my own. My body felt heavy, and I was so scared. A day passed, and I still didn't dare move. Police came. They took me away and began looking for my parents. They never found them, of course. People told me that they had abandoned me, but I know the truth. Even now. They came back for me, rescued me, and paid the price. I shouldn't be here, but they should. All my life, I've been looking for that damn door, but I couldn't find anything about it anywhere. Until now. Last night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it. A heavy door falling shut. It didn't pull me in. Not yet. But my heart is racing, even thinking about standing in front of that thing again. Even worse, I heard something else as well. Screams. The ones I never managed to forget. My parents are still in there. This thing told me. Still waiting for me. Tonight, when I go to sleep, I might see it again. That wooden door formed of shadows waiting for me to open it. I will stand in front of it. I will pull it open. And I will go in there. Whatever it is, I cannot live like this anymore. The fear and shame are just too much. I will find out what happened to my parents. And maybe, finally, come to save them for once.